Here's the take. The New York Giants cost themselves $60 million dollars by not picking up the fifth-year option on Daniel Jones back in 2022. New York Giants fans, 2022 definitely gave you something to feel good about. A lot of positive vibes. Things were on such a good trajectory. You had new head coach and Brian Daboll, who finally brought some competency to that offense. Saquon Barkley was back and better than ever coming off the injury. Danny Dimes stopped throwing it to the other team for the most part. You had the big win across the pond against Rodgers and the Packers that season, and ultimately a big playoff win on the road in Minnesota. That's a damn good year for a team that wasn't expected to even have a winning record. But to me, the crucial error the Giants made came long before the 2022 season even started. It was one of the reasons why 2023 was such a disaster and why they're still behind the eight ball heading into 2024. We will revisit those circumstances on this episode and ultimately how it ended up being a $60 million mistake. I don't see this talked about a whole lot, at least not in the national media anyway. Go back to the 2022 offseason. The Giants did not pick up the fifth-year option on Daniel Jones. And it created this domino effect over the past year and a half. Quick recap, just so we're all on the same page on how the fifth-year option works. Teams can exercise the fifth-year option on players who are drafted in the first round after that player's third season. That window opens after the regular season concludes and usually closes in early May-ish. As an example, we are currently inside of that right now here in 2024 when it comes to the 2021 first-round picks. Teams have from January 8th, 2024, which was the Monday after the Week 18 games this past season, up to May 2nd. Daniel Jones was drafted in the first round in 2019. So the 2022 offseason was the Giants' opportunity to pick up that fifth year. Generally speaking, a lot of things were going on in the 2022 Giants offseason. They hired Joe Schoen as their new general manager in January of 22. Joe Schoen then hired Brian Daboll as their new head coach 1 week later, and both of those guys had previously been in Buffalo. Schoen was the assistant general manager, and Daboll was the offensive coordinator. To be fair, you can make the argument that these guys are coming into a situation they did not create, right? Gettleman and at the time Pat Shurmur was the head coach. Those were the guys that drafted Daniel Jones. Then after Shurmur, you had the two horrendous Joe Judge years before they ended up just cleaning house. So at the time, going into that 2022 offseason, Daniel Jones had just put up 3 underwhelming years. They weren't winning, and he was turning the ball over at an alarming rate. He had absolutely zero trade value. Given that scenario, you could say, there's no way you can pick up Jones' fifth year. Well, based on the statistics and what you would expect a quarterback drafted 6th overall to give you, that would be a fair assessment. But here's where I think that strategy needed to and should have changed. I just told you, Schoen and Daboll were with the Bills prior to the Giants. Who was the quarterback during their time in Buffalo? That would be Josh Allen. And what was the general player profile for Josh Allen headed into the draft that year? And remember, Allen was taken in 2018, the year before Jones. Well, guy's got a big arm, sturdy frame, prototypical quarterback size, but he's not that accurate, and he played at Wyoming. So there were some questions about the level of competition. And then he gets drafted by Buffalo, and things were rough those first couple of Allen seasons. A lot of turnovers and poor decision making. But then you saw a massive jump in his play in 2020 and 2021. He was as good as any quarterback in the league over that span. Well, other than Aaron Rodgers, who won the back-to-back MVPs those year, but you get what I mean. The guy was must-see TV. So to me, if you are Joe Schoen, once you make the decision to hire the guy that helped turn the project quarterback into one of the best in the league, you are expecting better quarterback play and the offense to perform. Okay, so draft a quarterback. You have the 5th overall pick. Well, I'll remind you, 2022 was a terrible quarterback draft class. Only one quarterback was taken in the first round that year, when the Steelers selected Kenny Pickett at 20. The next quarterback off the board was Desmond Ridder at 74th overall. Okay, so drafting a quarterback is out. Well, what about trading for a quarterback? Look, I can't sit here and tell you for a fact they didn't consider it. I mean, I would assume they at least made some phone calls to some teams, but ultimately they didn't trade for a quarterback. Now, they did sign Tyrod Taylor that season, but clearly he was not going to be the future. He was being brought in as a backup. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was some overlap there with Taylor and Schoen from their time in Buffalo. So I say all that to point out their only option was to roll with Daniel Jones. And once they arrived at that conclusion, they should have exercised his 5th-year option. Look, the way that math works, especially when you're talking about the quarterback position, it becomes, at best, advantageous and, at worst, a hedged risk when you pick up a guy's 5th year. Because once you pick up the 5th year, the 4th year becomes fully guaranteed, as does the following year. So for Jones, that would have been about $22.3 million guaranteed for 2023, and he was already due about $6 million for the 2022 season based on his rookie contract. So all in, that would have been, again, for both seasons, you're talking $28 million. But the Giants did not do that. And then they signed Daniel Jones to one of the most outrageous contracts we've seen in a long time. 4 years, $160 with $81 million fully guaranteed. So now we go back to the math. What did the Giants just pay Daniel Jones for this lost 2023 season? About $20 million more than they would have owed him on that 5th-year option number. And what do the Giants now owe Daniel Jones for this upcoming season? About $40 million more than they would have. Because given how his play deteriorated last year, even prior to the injury, and then combined with the injury itself, he likely would have been released. Which means the Giants would owe Daniel Jones $0 for 2024. So you basically have a situation where the Giants have now paid Daniel Jones $60 million more than they needed to over the past 2 years. Think of how much they could have potentially done with that money. Saquon Barkley is and has been their best offensive player. Well, you probably would have gotten a deal done with him, and that whole situation last offseason could have been avoided. How about the offensive line? Yeah, I think having some of that $60 million could have been beneficial, considering they finished 30th in offensive line play last year, according to Pro Football Focus. And now, this latest idea that the Giants would even consider drafting J.J. McCarthy at 6 is very surprising to me. I'm not sure what is or is not accurate in terms of what's actually going on inside of the building. I just don't see how you can make that pick. First of all, when did J.J. McCarthy become a top 10 pick? I mean, I don't even remember him being discussed as a first-round guy, much less inside the top 10. And while we see quarterbacks rise in the draft all the time, in this particular case, I'm not seeing the how or why when it comes to McCarthy. Now, I fully expect those other 3 to go quickly. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. But to take J.J. McCarthy that high if you're the Giants, I think that would be a mistake. And it goes back to the Daniel Jones decision. Look, this year, the number 6 draft pick slots in at about $28 million in total contract value over those 4 years of the rookie deal, with $5.2 million scheduled against the 2024 cap. Daniel Jones counts as $47.1 million against the cap in 2024. So the Giants would be looking at using over $52 million on those two guys alone. I don't see how you can justify that, especially for a player in J.J. McCarthy that just does not seem to be a 100% sure thing. I mean, if the Giants did that, you're talking a little over 20% of your entire 2024 salary cap on one guy who is a turnover machine and likely won't be on the team in 2025, and on a rookie who would largely be considered a project. What is the plan there? Have McCarthy sit behind Jones for a year and learn? Learn what? How to turn the ball over? How to bail on the play before getting through your progression? I just don't think you can do that if you're Shane and Daboll. Just take a difference-making positional player, get a stud offensive lineman, or take one of these receivers, or get a corner to help the back end of that defense. But do not draft J.J. McCarthy at 6. Do not dig yourself a deeper hole at the quarterback position. We'll close it out on this. Look, I don't know any of these guys on a personal level, so I want to make it very clear that I'm speaking only to what I'm seeing as a fan of the sport. The purpose of today's episode was simply to show how one decision or indecision can impact the entire construct of the roster, and for multiple seasons. I'm fully aware of how the New York media would have been short-sighted and blasted Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll if their first major transaction as the new guys in town was to guarantee Daniel Jones an extra $22 million, especially after the way those first 3 years went. But now that you see the messy situation created by just having him play out the 4th year of the rookie contract, I think it's fair to assume they would like a mulligan.